Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
The Occupy movement's message seems to be having an impact. Governor Brown proposes a November ballot initiative to raise taxes on high earners, as a new study confirms the income gap in California has widened. A panel of federal judges hears arguments related to Proposition 8, California's voter-approved ban on same-sex marriage. Scientists at NASA Ames discover an Earth-like planet in distant space, leading researchers to look for signs of civilization. And on this 70th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, some first-hand accounts from local veterans who were there. Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me on our news panel are Scott Schaefer, host of the California Report on KQED Public Radio, and Josh Richmond, legal and political affairs reporter with the Oakland Tribune. Well, Josh, has the message of the Occupy movement taken a turn? Has it taken hold politically?
Well, I think that people far and wide across the country and around the world have to be listening to what the Occupy movement is saying by now. I think in terms of here in California, I think the governor had a plan for a while, and I think that the rhetoric of the Occupy movement is now giving him some cover to put that plan into action. What happened this week is that the governor rolled out a plan for an initiative that he wants to put on next November's ballot. To raise taxes on millionaires and high-income earners. Nobody making less than $500,000 is going to see any tax increase under his plan, except that an income tax. There is a temporary half-cent increase in sales taxes as well he wants to put forth. And he estimates this would raise about $7 billion to be spent only on education and public safety, which are obviously things that the public is very strongly in support of generally. You know, in terms of whether Occupy is to credit for this, it's hard to say exactly. I can tell you that a recent poll here in California found that about 58% of California voters agree with protesters' underlying reason for being out there in the streets. These questions of income inequality and insufficient funding for government services and so on and so forth. And we have a new poll out just this week which shows that the middle class in California has shrunken enormously over recent years. The poor have gotten significantly poorer. The gap between the rich and poor has widened. All of which we sort of knew, but the numbers are kind of striking, and I think that does provide some fuel for the fire for Jerry Brown's tax initiative and the others that are out there in the field, too.
Josh, we saw this week President Obama giving a speech in Kansas where he sort of embraced the basic ideas of the Occupy Wall Street movement without saying it specifically. Jerry Brown has said nothing about the Occupy Wall Street movement. Is there any evidence, when you look at the plan that he rolled out this week, is there evidence about what was in there or what wasn't in there that, you know, suggests that it really did have an impact on him?
Well, you know, like I said, I think this was his plan all along. You know, I think he intended to propose a tax on millionaires and was going to do that whether or not people had taken to the streets and plazas and parks this fall or not. But I think, you know, whether he's embracing Occupy or not, if his rhetoric is the same, then it's kind of hard to tell the difference between. You know, only he can speak to his own motivation. I think he might want some political cover from directly embracing Occupy, given what's happened in some of our California cities and college campuses over the last couple of weeks. But he's certainly, in an economic sense, he's sort of showing his colors on this, I think.
So this looking east to New York, Governor Cuomo also made a change of position over what he had proposed at first, and that was keeping him or letting a tax sunset.
That's exactly right. You know, the New York had a sort of a millionaire's tax, a surcharge that was bound to expire. The governor and the legislature were going to let that happen. And although their plan sort of let everybody declare victory, perfect political plan, right? Basically, instead of netting the $4 billion that the expiring surcharge on the very affluent in New York would have brought, they'll get about half that, about $2 billion. Which is better than nothing as far as these underfunded services are concerned. New York has a budget deficit, had a budget deficit of about $3.5 billion, which of course to us in California seems like chump change. New York has embraced the need for some sort of taxation. There's talk on the world stage of imposing some sort of tax on trades of stocks and bonds and other financial instruments, which is an idea that's been visited briefly here in the United States before. Pete Stark had a bill to tax currency transactions last year. The bill went no place. But there's some rhetoric going on out there from very diverse quarters, from people like Bill Gates, Pope Benedict, Al Gore, a lot of, well.
Sounds like the beginning of a joke.
It does.
They all walk into a bar
with a tax, right? But I mean, definitely, again, something, very populist sort of idea. That sort of plays on the outrage that we've been hearing against the financial sector all along.
I mean, so what Jerry Brown said this week is that he's going to go out and collect signatures to put this thing on the ballot. But at the same time, we've got probably going to be on the ballot a tax on gas and oil production. There's going to be a tobacco tax. There's another group altogether talking about an income tax.
There's actually two other groups talking about income tax initiatives. There was another proposal advanced this week by the California Federation of Teachers and some progressive groups to do a straight-up millionaire's tax with no sales tax increase. And there was the Think Long Committee plan that was rolled out last month, the language of which is still sort of in flux a little bit. But Nicholas Berggruen, who's a billionaire financier who sort of bankrolled this bipartisan committee to come up with this plan, is promising to spend $20 million or more to advance that taxation plan on next year's ballot. So we're facing a situation where we could easily get some voter fatigue from all of these competing initiatives.
Well, the movement was at first, how we found out about it, of course, and knew about it, was the pitching of tents. And
right.
So we have the tents have all been taken down at this point.
Not in Berkeley. I think Berkeley may be the last stronghold. But yes, San Francisco got cleaned out this week, early Wednesday morning. More than 80 people arrested, 142 tents cleared. There is an action coming up on Monday, not a tent occupation, but a proposed blockade of the Port of Oakland and all the other West Coast ports. I think we're planning for a significant number of protesters out there. Police today indicated that they will not allow these protesters to get into the Port of Oakland as they were allowed last time. So it should be interesting to see what happens on the streets in Oakland Monday.
It looked for a while, a couple weeks ago, that it was going to shift to the campuses. The UC Berkeley, there was that huge turnout, and students, of course, are really affected by tuition increases, and they're graduating with huge debt, and the job market is terrible. Did that kind of fizzle?
I think there's some action right now in City College of San Francisco and San Francisco State, but things have quieted down at Berkeley and Davis, where you had those very publicized incidents, and I think there's a wait-and-see sort of attitude in a lot of those places now.
Well, wait and see fits the the headline for this next story, because it's another incremental move in the Proposition 8 battle. So there was a court hearing, Scott, this week.
There was at the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, a federal panel of 3 judges. It's the long and winding road of Proposition 8. And this week there were 2 issues: whether or not to release the videotapes of the trial. That's kind of a separate issue. The second one that was more important and interesting is the judge in the case, Judge Vaughn Walker. After he retired, he revealed in an interview that he was gay and that he was in a 10-year relationship with another man. And so the proponents of Prop 8 said, well, wait a minute, you should have disclosed that. You had a conflict of interest. And so they were in court this week arguing to this panel of judges that that he should have at the very least said whether or not he intended to get married. And he got a hard time from the judges, the attorney for Prop 8 making this case. And we have a clip of Charles Cooper, who was one of the attorneys that argued, responding to a question from one of the judges, Randy Smith, about why this judge should have had to disclose this information. And here's what he said.
The cases that make clear that the burden is on the judge. It's on the judge to disclose information known only to the judge that might be relevant, would have potential relevance to the question whether or not the judge has an interest in the outcome of the case.
The point being that, you know, he ruled in a case that potentially he had an interest in. Now he might get married. But the other side, the Prop 8 opponents, were saying, no. You know, if that's the case, then then a heterosexual judge who's sitting in on a divorce case, does he have to disclose, for example, whether is he married? Is he thinking of getting a divorce? Does he have a rocky relationship? I mean, just how much information should a judge have to reveal? And David Boies, who was the attorney for the opponents of Prop 8, said that, you know, you really have to leave it up to the judge to decide whether or not it's relevant to the case. And here's how he described that in the argument.
Then what you are doing by the rule that Mr. Cooper advocates, simply creating a double standard, and it is going right in the face of the cases that have repeatedly held that minority judges, just like majority judges, are presumed to be impartial. And that if you...
So making that case that, you know, you can't have one set of rules for gay and lesbian judges and another set of rules for everybody else.
And this whole question of conflict starts at the highest court in the land.
It does. The U.S. Supreme Court, this has been an issue for years. Antonin Scalia went duck hunting with Vice President Cheney and then ruled on a case involving one of his friends. There's more recently, you've got Clarence Thomas, whose wife is very active in the Tea Party. And of course, there's a huge case involving the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, coming up. And there are people saying, well, you know, he should recuse himself from that. And also, Justice Kagan has interest in that law as well. She was the Solicitor General in the administration, the Obama administration. So, you know, it's this question of, you know, can they set aside those biases and that information and judge the issue fairly?
And there's one other issue.
There is the other issue, which is the videotapes. The trial was recorded. The judge at the time, Vaughn Walker, same judge, gave an assurance that those tapes would not be released. But then the proponent said, well, wait a minute, the trial is over. There's no reason not to release them so that we can have transparency. And the lower court judge agreed. Now this panel of judges is going to decide whether or not to release those tapes. My sense from the hearing this week is that they are not going to unseal those tapes. The judge made a promise not to release them, and I think they're concerned about the integrity of the judicial process. I think those tapes will not be made public.
Well, it was interesting that the panel of judges allowed the tape to be taken of the hearing where they were going to decide this.
They did. Well, the Ninth Circuit tends to be much more friendly to cameras than other courts. Certainly the Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court does not really, they're not ready to have cameras. They feel that, you know, that clips like the ones we just saw can be used and taken out of context.
Well, my thanks to both of you for joining us here tonight. Well, the announcement in Mountain View earlier this week of the discovery by the Kepler spacecraft of a planet similar to Earth has scientists searching for signs of life. NewsHour correspondent Spencer Michaels has this report on the astral findings.
This is facing the sun.
More than 20 years ago, space scientist William Borucki dreamed up a plan to explore our galaxy to find the extent of life, if there is any, beyond the Earth. It was a daunting and expensive challenge. This week, and $600 million later, at a conference of his peers in Mountain View, California, Borucki and NASA announced they had found the first planet in the habitable zone. That means what's being called the Goldilocks planet is just right, orbiting its star at the proper distance to have water necessary for life. Similar to Earth, though bigger, scientists say the temperature averages about 72 degrees. 600 light years away, it orbits its own sun every 290 days. Borucki and his team found it using the Kepler Space Telescope, which was launched 3 years ago and remains in orbit around the sun. He calls it a giant camcorder, which was designed specifically to look for planets where life might be possible, and at the stars they orbit, 150,000 of them, much like our own sun.
The mission was designed to do this job. It has no other purpose.
I talked with him at NASA's Ames facility on the grounds of Naval Air Station Moffett Field about how Kepler can detect a planet.
We look at each star to see, did something dim the star? Did something move across the star, dim it? If it dims the star a lot, it's a big planet. Just a little bit, it's a small planet, maybe like Earth. So it's focused on one set of stars in a part of the Milky Way where there's a huge number of stars. And it just takes a photo every 6 seconds.
Scientists have found more than 2,000 candidate planets in the 2 years they've been looking, and 48 they think could hold life. But this latest one, Kepler 22b as it's called, is the most promising so far.
Was there ever a kind of an aha moment when you knew something was really important?
Yes, there was. I was just delighted to see that data come down. It's a feeling of utter satisfaction. We've worked for 20 years to get this moment, to see this data. And people said it couldn't be done. It was just impossible. So it was very satisfying to see the data that says, yes, we're getting the answers that we have worked so hard over all these years.
Borucki and his colleagues can't see Kepler 22b. It's too small and too far away. The fastest modern rocket ship would take 24 million years to get there. Scientists also know little about the atmosphere or what the planet is made of. It could be more like gassy Neptune than Earth, but they can interpret data.
What can you do with that knowledge?
What we're trying to do with this knowledge is we're building a picture, and the picture is how many stars in all the galaxy have planets something like the Earth where life could be possible. If the answer is many, then there's probably a lot of life in our galaxy, and the next instruments that get built to look at the atmospheres will look just at the close by stars, because most of them will have planets. So you won't have to look very far.
Scientists are taking the discovery of a potentially habitable planet seriously, even if it is 600 light years away. At SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, they're planning on following up the NASA discoveries.
SETI operates a bank of 42 small radio telescopes from a site near a fine fishing stream in Northern California. Its director for research, Jill Tarter, says those telescopes will now focus in on Kepler 22b.
Well, that's certainly one place that we want to look, because we want to ask the question and perhaps find the answer, does anybody live there? And this particular Kepler 22b is the smallest, most Earth-like planet of those that we know to be in the habitable zone. So it's a clear winner in terms of us pointing our telescopes there.
How do they attempt this?
We're looking for radio signals that appear to be engineered, that don't look natural, but look like someone generated them in order to attract our attention.
You're looking for life then, intelligent life.
Well, we're looking for the technologies, right? And if we find the signals that are engineered, then we'll infer that at least at some point there were technologists.
And does NASA's Borucki think there may be life out there?
I think there's a very high possibility of life, but I'm speculating. Up to now, what I've been telling you are facts. These are the measurements we made, and it's the difference between science and speculation.
Meanwhile, the search for more planets in the habitable zone goes on, and so does the search for ways to figure out what's going on in places scientists can't even see.
Well, Wednesday, December 7th, marked the 70th anniversary of the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor. Next, we hear from several Bay Area survivors about how that morning forever changed their lives. Here is an excerpt from This Is Us series on KQED+.
For young men that had grown up on small farms and in small towns across the nation, a train trip to a California military base seemed like an epic journey. And being a blue water sailor in Hawaii held the promise of paradise.
Well, I got a railroad train ride all the way from St. Louis to San Diego, California.
Joined the Navy in January 1941 at the post office in Oakland. And I went to boot camp in San Diego.
Most of the men that had joined the Navy felt they had escaped the Depression, had a steady job, and were finally eating 3 square meals a day. Their troubles were seemingly behind them. If California was heaven for most sailors, Hawaii was Shangri-La before the war.
Next 2 men pick them up and take them to the sick bay. Yeah.
Tony Jalepis from South San Francisco was stationed in the islands and was aboard a supply ship that pulled into Honolulu Harbor the afternoon of December the 6th. At the same time, the Imperial Japanese Navy was steaming towards Hawaii.
tied up at Pier 31A, Honolulu Harbor, and about noon of December the 6th. So we had been at sea 15 days, and so you can imagine, well, we were a little thirsty and wanted to hit the beach, which we did.
Jalipis headed to a bar with his shipmates. He was given a certificate that night at a joint called the Royal Annex that he has kept for 70 years. That piece of paper would foreshadow the events of the next morning.
But up at the top it says, drink down the hatch, drink and be merry, for tomorrow you may die. How prophetic that was, of course, you know what happened the next morning, December the 7th.
On the morning of December 7, 1941, the Japanese Armada was 200 miles north of Hawaii. The Naval Task Force, spearheaded by 6 Japanese aircraft carriers, launched 353 planes in 2 waves. Their mission was to destroy American military installations and aircraft on the ground throughout the islands. But the main prize was the American Navy and the battleships that lay at anchor at Pearl Harbor. The attack began at 7:48 a.m.
I was awakened by the bed shaking, the windows rattling, and I thought to myself, the GD Army is doing war games again.
Larson was stationed at the Diamond Head Lighthouse, and as he scrambled out of bed, what he saw left a chilling memory.
3 torpedo planes flew over me that Sunday morning, and I could see the rivets on the side, you know, the canopy.
The Japanese torpedo pilots targeted the battleships that were moored right next to each other at Pearl with merciless accuracy.
Around 8 o'clock, I heard this noise, and then the general quarters sounded, man your battle stations.
John Rauschkolb was enjoying a cup of coffee aboard the bridge of the West Virginia when he happened to glance off the port side of his ship.
I could see a Japanese plane headed for my ship. I felt 6 torpedoes hit the port side of my ship. The U.S. Navy said 7, the Japanese said 9, and 2 bombs. And that big bomb that sank the Arizona, they had one of those specially designed for each battleship in the harbor. The one that hit the West Virginia came down pretty close to me on the starboard side. Went down 3 decks and didn't explode, just sat there. But the one that hit the Arizona hit the forward magazine, and it blew up that whole magazine, and that's what destroyed the ship.
At 6 minutes after 8 a.m., the Arizona blew up and sank with a loss of 1,177 sailors out of a crew of 1,400. The Oklahoma capsized, and the Utah also sunk. The difference between living and dying on the morning of December 7, 1941, was a matter of fate, chance, and luck. One sailor aboard the sinking West Virginia dove into the oil-coated water that was on fire. Several days later, his obituary appeared in his hometown newspaper. He still carries that obituary with him 70 years later.
As I reported in over there, my fellow sailor, Jack Casperson, reported at the same time. I don't know where he'd been. He didn't know where I'd been. Personally, it didn't give a damn anyway. But the repair party said, yes, go up amidships and put that fire out. Yes, sir. So, Jack, here's what we're going to do. I'll go in with my hose, and you spray your hose on me. I'll come out, you go in, and I'll spray my hose on you. And that's the procedure we used, and we put that fire out. Nobody showed up to relieve us, and it was hot. It was so damn hot, all I had was skivvies on, and they were just about shredded from the heat.
It would take almost 4 more years for the United States to fight their way back across the Pacific. The end of the war wasn't officially over until the Japanese finally surrendered aboard the USS Missouri on Tokyo Bay on September 2nd, 1945.
Well, that's all for tonight. We invite you to visit us at kqed.org/thisweek. You'll find a link there to the full-length This Is Us Pearl Harbor special. I'm Belva Davis. Thank you for watching. Good night.